Now, from the University of Okoboji, it's Okoboji Broadcast with Jeff Thee.
Welcome to Okoboji Broadcast, everybody. I'm Jeff Thee. It's Wednesday. We're right here at the Dickens County Museum, and I always like to bring along Mary Dreier, the director, here with us.
I am so glad. I enjoy these dates a lot.
I do too. I enjoy them immensely, and today we going fishing.
We is going fishing. We are, because this weekend is the Walleye opener.
Yes.
For one thing.
Number 42.
Number 42.
Yes.
With the grand prize of
$42,000.
Did you know, Jeff, I learned this today. We talked about it at way back when. Did you know that I think it was around 2003 or so, they instituted a polygraph test if you were the one to catch the big ticket fish?
No, I didn't know that. As closely as have worked with Walleye Weekend.
Yeah.
I'm trying to remember if I remember that. It sounds vaguely familiar, but I think maybe I've forgotten about it.
It sounds like there was an issue the year before, and that issue was that a guy caught one of the tagged fish. Mm-hmm. And you know, if the fish is tagged, then you get a fabulous prize. I mean, really.
At that time, it was $10,000.
Yeah.
And it remained $10,000 for a long time, and then we decided to go with the year that it was.
Yeah, so this year it's $42,000.
Yes.
Back at the time we're talking about, it was $10,000, which was a heck of a lot of money. Anyway, a guy caught the tagged fish. Mm-hmm. He hadn't registered. You have to register in order to be eligible for the prizes, and he hadn't done that.
Yeah.
But there was a kid on the dock, and he said, "Hey kid, you want the fish? And we'll split the proceeds."
Yeah.
And so the kid took in the fish, and being a kid, he went around and he talked about what he had done, and
I remember
the
this.
powers that be found out, and hence the lie detector test the next year.
And this is before social media, and it still spread like wildfire.
Did it really?
We all knew about it.
You were here then?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So, yeah, that was probably my, at that point, 13th or so Walleye Weekend around here. So, I remember that, and I've forgotten about the polygraph test. And
yeah, and the article I read, it was mandated by the insurance company that covers the cost of the prize.
Yeah.
So, anyway,
Interesting.
Interesting.
But
Fish and tails,
Fish
right?
and tails, yeah. I caught one this big with a tag. No, you didn't.
Fishing is a big thing here. I mean, we're going to be inundated with people this weekend.
Yes.
Out hunting those walleyes.
Uh-huh.
But back in the day, in the earliest of days, fishing was a big deal here. It was a way, one of the main ways for folks to get food here.
Sure.
And I found a story this morning that I'd like to share.
Yeah.
And it comes from Aubrey LaFoy, and it's about his grandmother, Georgia Spurbeck Holcomb. And she was born in 1861, so early days. Her father, James Spurbeck, homesteaded a farm on the east shore of Big Spirit Lake in 1867, so just 10 years after the Spirit Lake Massacre.
Right.
And Aubrey's grandma told the story that there was never any trouble catching fish in those days. They just simply went down to the lake and caught a whole bunch of fish whenever they needed. Mm-hmm. In winter, they cut a hole in the ice, and they would actually scoop fish out.
Oh, wow.
There were that many fish around. During the grasshopper invasion, we've talked about that other times here, 1870s here in the area. There were like between 4 and 6 years within an 8-year period where there was no crop.
Right.
The farmers had no crops because the grasshoppers came in and ate them.
Yes.
And they had no seed to replant because the grasshoppers ate that too. So folks were starving.
Yeah.
Well, Aubrey's grandmother talked about how they could always depend on fish. Fish is what got them through this period.
Right.
Everything else was eaten alive, but they could always eat fish. One winter, she told about that some friends had come to the log cabin that they were living in and to visit, just kind of a party time. And by the time everybody got there were 19 people in this log cabin. And the afternoon was pleasant, and they visited, and they played games. And lo and behold, all of a sudden, a blizzard came up. So all these people were stuck in this cabin, and there wasn't enough food for everybody. So what they did was they went down to the lake, and can you guess the rest of the story?
I'm guessing they cut a hole in it and scooped out some fish.
They scooped out a whole bunch of fish. I forget how many gunny sacks full of fish.
Holy cow.
And they ate those. And there's a...
I'm guessing there was no limit back then.
I'm guessing there was no limit back then. The Outer Great Lakes was a fisherman's paradise back in the day. I mean, there were so many fish. And such a variety of fish. We even had the big paddlefish, we've talked about those before too, that grew up to 200 pounds and looked like they were prehistoric. Very cool fish. I wish they were still here. Anyway, people would come from long distances to seine fish or spearfish, whatever. You know how they kept them? Once they caught them?
No.
They packed them in barrels with salt. But they didn't really have a real recipe or a real formula for the salt. So there were times that went on when they didn't have enough salt in with the fish, and so the fish rotted.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Fishermen who did that were called swill barrel fishermen.
Swill barrel fishermen.
Swill barrel fishermen. Tons and tons of fish were removed from the lakes. And there were so many fish that fish would be left on the shores to rot.
Wow.
It was all about the sport of catching fish,
yeah.
besides the food. And then there was a problem of when dams were put in the creeks, fish couldn't come upstream anymore to get into the lakes. Mm-hmm. And so a law was passed, I think it was 1878, that required anyone who put in a dam to put in a fish ladder also. So fish could still come upstream.
Could flop their way to the into the lake.
Yeah. And then, something I don't know if we've talked about, but I find just fascinating. There was a thing called a fish car.
A fish car, okay.
Yeah, now what do you think a fish car is?
Transporting fish?
Oh, that's a really good guess. You dug deep for that one,
That was a
Jeff.
wide brush I used there, Mary.
In 1876, there was the first fish car in Iowa, and it came about because someone who was employed by the Conservation Commission, or whatever it was called at the time, was along the Mississippi, and he noticed in the pools and eddies that there were all these little dead fish. And he had this brilliant idea. We need fish in other parts of the state. Why don't we take fish from the Mississippi and take them to the parts of the state that need fish? And so he hatched this idea after some trials and tribulations of creating a fish car. The fish car was a baggage car on a train that was reworked. Here's a description of it. It was fitted with a number of tanks, one below the other. A large tank was built in the front of the car, and the water in this passed into the first tank, flowing into the second, and so on. At last, it found its way into a tank below the car and was elevated again into the first tank. So it was kind of a revolving system of fresh water. And so there was running water on the fish at all times. The axles of the wheels of the car was the motor which kept the pump operating. At lengthy stops, the water was pumped by hand. The rear was always next to the engine, so when the engine stopped for water, the fish tanks would also be filled. So the water was aerated. They figured out that they needed to aerate the water.
Aerate that water to keep the fish alive.
Yeah.
And does it mention what kind of fish they were bringing over to from the Mississippi?
It does. Walleye was one for sure. I'm not seeing it right off the top of my head. But I do have Here's a story about crappies, pickerel, bach bass, and I don't know what bach bass are. Small bach bass, silver bass, and sunfish weighing from 1/4 pound to 1.5 pounds. And in 1897, they placed 125,000 of these fish into the Cedar River. Now, at the same time, fish were coming this way. And also fish, small fish from the Iowa Great Lakes were shipped to other parts of the state. One notable thing that I kind of have a personal interest in is that back in 1893, there was a very special event going on in Chicago.
The World's Fair?
Bingo! Good for you. You get 10 points for that one.
All right. 10 whole points.
The Chicago World's Fair. Believe it or not, the state of Iowa had a fish exhibition at the Chicago World's Fair.
Sure.
They, I think, I read this pretty quickly, but I think they were the only state in the nation to do this. And they shipped tanks and they shipped fish and the stuff to take care of them and all this to the Chicago World's Fair. Super huge, big deal.
Yeah.
Guess what happened? The fish started dying.
Ooh.
So, in a newspaper article that was sent to me, there is, and it's talking about Mr. Delavan, who is the state fish hatchery commissioner, and his able assistant, who was Ole Bjørnson, my great-grandfather.
Yes.
He was a Norwegian who's been with the Fish Commission 11 years and probably knows more about the business than any other man in the state. This was exemplified at the Chicago World's Fair. Many of the fish that were shipped from Iowa to be on exhibition were dying, and the managers were at a loss as to ascertain the cause. Iowa's commissioner, Mr. Griggs at that time, advised sending for Ole Bjørnson. He was telegraphed for, went to Chicago, investigated the drainage facilities and the methods of feeding, made suggestions in reference therefore, which were carried out, and the fish stopped dying.
Oh.
My great-grandfather!
Yeah, isn't that awesome?
Isn't that cool?
Yes.
This article came out of nowhere to me one day, and it was so cool. This little Norwegian guy who was sent from the far northwest corner of Iowa to the big city to save the fish.
Wow. That is a neat story.
It's like a fairy tale,
It
isn't
is,
it, Jeff?
isn't it?
Yeah. So these fish cars, they were a big deal.
Yeah.
They were a big deal. They were a way to transport fish from one place that was overstocked with a certain kind to a place where there was a lack of that same fish.
Right.
And the fish cars were a big deal until I think it was in the teens or so.
Okay.
And they became less of a deal. And the first fish car was called the Hawkeye 1, the one that was refurbished. And it became less splashy, I guess, would be a nice... That was a good term for you to choose. Splashy.
You put some thought into that.
No, I did not. And so another fish car was commissioned.
Cyclone one?
No, it was the Hawkeye 2.
Oh,
unfortunately, you thought about that one too, didn't you, Jeff? Anyway, the second fish car, the Hawkeye 2, traveled the rails for quite some time, and it ended up at the State Fish Hatchery right here in Spirit Lake.
Okay.
Mark Mayer, who has been digitizing our photos, found this picture one day, and it showed a train car on the fish hatchery grounds. And we thought, what the heck?
Yeah.
We couldn't see any tracks going to it or anything. Well, I found out today, while I was doing my my targeted prep and research for this, that the fish car in the late 30s was transformed into housing for state workers at the fish hatchery. And in 1944, it met its final demise and was taken to the junkyard.
Nothing more comfortable than an empty train car as a house. Yeah.
It had been housing fish for decades. Yeah. So I guess what I wanted to, just bring people's awareness to is the fact that Walleye Weekend is a big deal around here.
Yes.
No two ways about it. But fishing has always been a big deal around here. Always been a big deal.
Well, and certainly before pioneers and people coming here, the indigenous
This was
certainly were.
absolutely.
Yeah.
This was their hunting grounds,
Yes.
not just for fish, but for animals also.
Yeah.
This area is so rich in resources.
Yes.
And people throughout the decades, throughout the centuries, have used those resources to thrive.
Yeah. Without all the modern conveniences, whatever they have in
That's
fishing
right.
boats anymore.
That's right.
Depth finders and fish finders, and I don't know what else they use.
Yeah.
Hooks.
Yeah.
I guess they have hooks.
I would think probably, but they're probably
Shows you how much
they're probably wired up to a webcam or something,
Yeah,
so you can
probably.
see the fish. I don't know.
With my
It's-
knowledge of all the terminology, you can tell that I'm not winning $42,000 this weekend.
Nor
that's
am
for sure.
I. Nor am I.
Oh, wonderful memories. Great, and especially the story of your great-grandfather.
Isn't that the coolest thing ever?
As we approach this 42nd Walleye Weekend, to bring that out.
It took
That's awesome.
guys like little Ole Bjørnsen, an immigrant from Norway,
Yeah.
to help the fishing industry here,
Yeah.
and really probably nationwide.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Mary.
Sure,
As always,
sure.
love coming here. Any special programs coming up here? Of course, way back Wednesday, every Wednesday.
Well,
but-
I'd like to highlight something that happened today.
Okay.
Two friends of mine, Ryan Maris and Emma Meyer, have created a podcast called the Okoboji Project.
Ah,
And what they have done is they have spent months, absolutely months, interviewing different folks, including us here at the museum, about the early days of Okoboji.
Oh.
And they dropped their first podcast this morning, and it is about the beginnings of the University of Okoboji.
oh, neat.
And it was absolutely so cool. I cried. We played it for our Way Back When folks today, and they applauded at the end of it. I would urge anyone who's interested in the early days of Okoboji to find that podcast. It's the Okoboji Project. I have to get the name
There you go.
straight on however you get your podcast.
Yeah, Spotify or any of
And
those.
it's well worth.
Oh.
It's well worth. It's fabulous.
Very good.
And May 16th, we have Kevin Mason coming back. Kevin Mason was here a year ago and spoke about Ink Paduta. This spring, he is going to be sharing about his travels along the Dragoon Trail from Keokuk, Iowa, way in the southeast corner, up to Minnewacan State Park right here in Spirit Lake. He walked it.
Wow.
The slow walk across Iowa.
Yeah.
So it's going to be fabulous.
Fascinating. Very
Yeah.
good. All right, Mary, again, thank you so much. Always a
Thank you.
pleasure, my friend.
The same.
Thank you so much. Mary Dreier again here. Everybody, Dickens County Museum, come check it out. So much history, so much fun, to say the least, right here at our museum. We thank Mary for her time. We thank you for watching us right here on Okoboji Broadcast. Okoboji Broadcast from the studios at historic Arnold's Park Amusement Park is brought to you in part by West Wealth Management, a financial advisory practice of Ameriprise Financial Services. Advisor Jan Spielman, AJ Spielman, and Erica Wachholz. The headquarters of the University of Okoboji is at the Three Sons, open Monday through Saturday 10 to 5 and Sunday from 10 to 4. Bank Midwest, dream big, plan wisely, live well. Lakes Regional Healthcare and Avera Partner. Beck Engineering in Spirit Lake. Be Radiant Laser Skin Studio in the Okoboji Plaza in Okoboji.